Dahmer. Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story is based on actual events. In certain cases, incidents, characters, and timelines have been changed for dramatic purposes. Certain characters may be composites or entirely fictitious. Here are those certain cases. Episode 1. Jeffrey Dahmer and Tracy Edwards didn't meet at Club 219. Although the downtown Milwaukee gay bar, Club 219, was a hangout Jeffrey Dahmer frequented, this isn't where he introduced himself to his last victim, Tracy Edwards. And Tracy Edwards never confirmed to the media or any sources that he was a homosexual. Dahmer and Edwards were formally introduced to each other at the Grand Avenue Mall, while Edwards was with his cousin and some homegirls.
Where was it that you saw him in the late afternoon, early morning hours of July the 22nd?
Grand Avenue Mall.
Okay, so the record is absolutely clear. You are not a homosexual, are you?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Dahmer didn't offer $50 to Tracy Edwards.
You guys would oppose to me, I can give you $50.
Dahmer would typically offer his victims $50 for a photo shoot to lure them back to his apartment.
I'm not dropping my drawers for no $50.
In the case of Tracy Edwards, he dug deep into his wallet and raised the fee to $100.
So your interest was in making some money?
Right.
Did he tell you how much you would be paid if you did pose for him?
He said $100.
Edwards tried to trick Dahmer with the AC suggestion, not the other way around.
No, it's where the air conditioner is, okay? You just go in there.
It was actually Edwards, not Dahmer's, suggesting to sit in the AC to drown out the odor. Also, the living room was the room with the air conditioning, not the bedroom. Glenda Cleveland lived in the next apartment building, not next door. Glenda Cleveland is Dahmer's next door neighbor in the series, and she could hear and smell the horror that's going on next door. In actuality, Miss Cleveland wasn't a direct neighbor, but lived in the adjacent apartment next to the Oxford apartments. In the series, Glenda Cleveland is a composite of the real Miss Cleveland, as well as other neighbors that suspected Dahmer of foul play in 1991. Detective Murphy wasn't black. Detective Patrick Kennedy and Detective Dennis Murphy logged long hours interviewing the serial killer. Detective Murphy, the only black guy in the room, points out the systematic racism element involved in Dahmer's crimes.
You targeted your victims.
Sorry?
You purposefully moved into an apartment in the black community, to an area that was under-patrolled and underserved. And you knew that, isn't that right?
In real life, both detectives were white males. Episode 2. Please don't go. Dahmer was 4, not 6 years old, when he became fascinated with corpses. Dahmer's fascination with corpses started at 4. He witnessed his father removing animal bones from underneath their home. Dahmer began playing with the bones and referred to them as his fiddlesticks.
And he started to go through the pile of bones. He was just 4 years old.
Right.
Correct?
I looked down and I saw Jeff.
He called them fiddlesticks.
And he said it's sort of like fiddlesticks.
They're like fiddlesticks.
Conorak didn't have on briefs when the police questioned him. He was completely naked. On May 27, 1991, Glenda Cleveland, her niece Nicole Childress, and her daughter Sandra Smith witnessed Conorak's synthesophone wandering around in the street dazed and confused and naked.
Okay, hi, I'm on 25th and State, and this is young man. He is butt naked. He has been beaten up. He is very bruised up. He can't stand. He's study fall out. He is butt naked. He has no clothes on. He was really hurt. And I ain't got no cord on him. I just seen him, and he needs some help.
Where is he at?
On 25th and State, the corner of 25th and State.
3, not 2 officers escorted Dahmer and Conorak back to the apartment. Officer Balserzak and Gabrish arrived to the scene. In addition, the fire department arrived and gave the naked boy a blanket. The 2 officers sent the fire department away after they checked him for injuries. A 3rd officer arrived to the scene. Together, Officer John Balserzak, Joseph Gabrish, and Richard Perupkin escorted the victim and Dahmer back to Dahmer's apartment. Episode 3, Doing a Dahmer. Dahmer started drinking his freshman year, not his senior year. Joyce and Lionel's marriage was doomed from the start, so it makes sense that Dahmer had problems at home. He began drinking at 14, not during his senior year like the series suggests. Joyce's infidelity was the reason for the divorce, not Lionel's. The straw that broke the camel's back for his parents' relationship was when Lionel discovered Joyce had an affair. The series points out Lionel's mistress, but omits Joyce's affair that took place the previous year. Dahmer never confronted the jogger. Dahmer had a confirmed kill count of 17 fatalities. Number 1 on that list was almost the jogger. Dahmer patiently waited for the jogger to trot by, but luckily, the jogger never arrived that day.
He had hid behind a tree
But that particular jogger did not come by, so he abandoned that idea.
Dahmer's fan club wasn't comprised of jocks. In the series, Dahmer's fan club is primarily comprised of stereotypical jocks, but his fan club consists of his friends Kent, Mike, Durf, and Neil. Outside of the murderous fantasies, they mostly shared similar interests as Dahmer. Episode 4, The Good Boy Box. Dahmer's yearbook photo was supposed to be a prank. The Dahmer fan club came up with a senior prank where Dahmer would photobomb all the high school club photos. The National Honor Society photobomb plays out in the series, but by omitting the school newspaper club and the rock climbing club photobombs, the incident is played for dramatic effect. It makes it look like Jeffrey Dahmer was self-conscious about his grades.
Years ago, we thought that photo was hilarious, and it's not so funny anymore.
Lionel paid for 2 semesters, not just one, before Dahmer dropped out. A concern for his grades wasn't the case when he enrolled at Ohio State. Jeffrey Dahmer failed every class except riflery.
Jeff has been expelled.
He wasn't kicked out, but dropped out of OSU 3 months after his first semester. This was money down the drain for his father, who had paid for the first and second semester in advance.
We're gonna get you into Ohio State. Yeah, I'll even pay for the first semester.
Dahmer had military victims in Germany, not basic training. While he's in the military, Dahmer date rapes one of the cadets during training. Tanner is more than likely a composite of 2 veterans who have come forward and shared non-consensual horror stories about Dahmer. Those events took place after Dahmer was deployed to West Germany, not before, like it's depicted in the show. Dahmer threw out the mannequin. Dahmer stole a mannequin from a department store and used it to add some tangibility to his dark fantasies. On the show, he was crushed when his grandmother threw it out without consulting him. The difference is, Catherine Dahmer did discover the mannequin, but urged Jeffrey to get rid of it, and he was the one who tossed it in the trash heap.
After a week or 2, Grandma happened to stumble across it. Yeah, she asked me, what was it, where did I get it? And I gave her some story that I picked it up that they had extra mannequins that they were selling. I think she told my dad. So I figured I better get rid of it. Took it down to the basement and smashed it up and threw it out in the garbage.
Dahmer was laid off 10 months before exposing himself. In the series, Dahmer exposed himself at the Wisconsin State Park. He was penalized with a small fine, but the biggest cost was charged when he lost his job because of his actions. The actual timeline of events include Dahmer getting laid off from his phlebotomist job prior to the events at the state park. He was never fired for exposing himself. Dahmer never switched drinks with Steve Tomey. The night surrounding the Milwaukee Monster's second victim is a blur to the maniac. The actor mistakenly takes the drug drink instead of offering it to Steve. In 1990, Dahmer did make a mistake and drunk the wrong drink that was laced with sedatives. This allowed his victim to get away, only after the victim stole $300 and a watch while Jeffrey was out cold. With Steve Tomey, the killer wasn't drugged, but just doesn't remember killing him because of alcohol, blacking out, or blocking out the memory of murder.
There's blood everywhere. He said he was in an alcoholic blackout. It was a surprise to him.
Episode 5, Blood on Their Hands. Dahmer dug up the grave in 1986. Similar to his mannequin technique, Jeffrey Dahmer searched for alternatives outside of murder for his desires. In 1986, he read the obituary section and found a face he was attracted to. He did try to dig up the body for personal necrophilia use, but according to the book The Man Who Could Not Kill Enough, Dahmer revealed the attempt to dig up the grave happened between 1985 and 1986, not during the 1987 timeline like the show suggested. Jeffrey took a victim to the hospital. Jeffrey Dahmer graduated from misdemeanors to felonies. His attempt to date rape a potential victim was sabotaged by his grandmother. She heard noises downstairs, and after his grandma saw the young man, Jeff got a bad feeling and decided to take the guy to the hospital instead of an early grave. Keeson synthesophone was taken at Dahmer's first apartment, not his grandmother's house. Keeson synthesophone is another fortunate target that got away. The 13-year-old boy was taken to Jeffrey Dahmer's first apartment, not his grandmother's house, and managed to flee from the scene before Dahmer could do his dirty work.
Just one day after moving into his own apartment, Dahmer brings home a 13-year-old boy, drugs, and fondles him. Dahmer is arrested for sexual assault against a minor.
Dahmer wasn't kicked out of his grandmother's house for child molestation charges. Keeson is the reason Jeffrey was kicked out of his grandmother's house in the series. But truthfully, He was kicked out 2 days prior to meeting Keeson. Sherry, Dahmer's stepmother, smelled the odor of Dahmer's experiments coming from the garage and asked her husband to check on it. The evidence was more obvious than the show suggested. Lionel found bones and residue in containers, but couldn't tell if they were human or animal. He decided to take his son's word for it.
He was doing strange things. We thought it was with roadkill. That's what he told us, and I believed him. But I said, Jeff, you know, your grandma just can't take this sort of thing. You really need to move out.
Episode 6, Silenced. Anthony Sears and Tony Hughes. Anthony Sears and Tony Hughes have a lot in common besides their names. The traits of Tony Hughes in the series seem to be a composite of both he and Sears' story. Both were aspiring models, but it was Sears that Dahmer seemed to have an affinity for. Dahmer expressed that he was extremely attracted to Sears, and he was the first victim that Dahmer permanently kept his remains after dismembering him. Dahmer thought he was in love with Anthony Sears, not Anthony Hughes.
You think you love Tony?
Yeah, I could say that if I knew how to love, I would have loved him. It was just a matter of trying to preserve what I had left.
Dahmer's photography lies. The series suggested that Dahmer got the idea of posing as a photographer to trick his prey while he was on a date with Tony, his 12th victim. Realistically, Dahmer had used his fake photographer strategy on his 3rd victim in 1988. This was a year before he met his 5th mark, Sears, and 3 years before his 12th, Hughes.
James Dockstader is only 14 years old when Dahmer lures him with the promise of $50 to take a few pictures.
Episode 7, Cassandra. Dean Vaughn's unsolved case. The Milwaukee cannibal received 16 life sentences for a total of 941 years after confessing to the murders of 17 people. Dean Vaughn was not one of the names included in Jeffrey's interrogation interviews. It suggested in the series that Jeffrey was the one who killed Dean, but his case remains unsolved. Dean lived in the same building and was found strangled in his apartment. Before his death, 2 neighbors told authorities they saw him with an unknown subject. The neighbor helped Dahmer clean his apartment. In the series, Dahmer hires a cleaning crew to get rid of the smell that's pushing him to the brink of eviction. In real life, Dahmer, who had always complained about financial woes, couldn't afford a cleaning crew, but instead asked his neighbor Pamela Bass to help him clean up the stench.
I went in, they helped him clean up, and he told me, he said, it's the freezer over there that my grandma had sent me some meat, and I put it in there, and I went back to her house, and I forgot to plug it in. I haven't been around no dead people. I don't know anything about how they smell.
The neighbor ate the sandwich. One of the neighbors at the Oxford Apartments was Pamela Bass, but her story is blended with Glenda Cleveland's story. Pamela Bass, not Glenda Cleveland, was offered the sandwich by Dahmer. Bass was unsuspecting, as she and other residents found Dahmer friendly and were used to him offering sandwiches to all his neighbors. After the story of his arrest broke, she realized she never saw Dahmer carrying groceries and suspects the sandwich she ate was filled with human meat.
You have people like me who is befriending you, and you are over here cutting up human bodies, eating body parts. I have eaten a sandwich from you. I have probably eaten someone's body part. How dare you?
Episode 8, Lionel. Catherine Hughes' dementia. When Dahmer was finally arrested for his crimes, his family members were haunted by the media coverage. The blow was softened for his grandmother in the Netflix show because she was blessed with ignorance from the dementia. Catherine Dahmer was 87 at the time of Jeffrey's arrest and was of sound mind and body during his hearings. She told the press that the news was terrible and she loved them very much.
After I informed Catherine, his grandmother, about his activities and what he did, she broke down and cried.
It wasn't dementia that was bothering her, but the family left a note at her front door alerting the public that she had a tough time handling the cranked phone calls. Also, she was trying to recover from pneumonia and injuries suffered from a recent car accident. Nick never claimed to be a high school sweetheart. The arrest had a negative impact on his father as well. Lionel and his wife Sherry watched an episode of Geraldo, where a secret guest with the codename Nick claimed Lionel had sexually molested his son. There was a guest named Nick on both the Geraldo and Donahue show. He claimed to date Dahmer in 1985, not during Jeffrey's high school years.
Nick, You're an out-of-the-closet gay male, and you met Dahmer in a gay bar, and you dated for 2 to 3 months in 1985, so?
I didn't realize it until I saw his picture, and that's when everything snapped to me.
Jeffrey was sexually abused as a child. In addition, Lionel scoffs at the idea of Jeffrey having a sexual encounter during his adolescence.
Well, that's not true.
No, it's not true. None of it's true.
According to Jeffrey's father, when Jeffrey was 8, he was abused by a neighbor boy, possibly leading to his sexual problems in his adult years. The event was unreported. Jeffrey refuted his father's claims, but did mention a consensual homosexual relationship he engaged in when he was 14 or 15.
Just kissing, laying together in a treehouse. I was about 14 or 15, and that was consensual.
Jeffrey agreed to an insanity plea. Lionel and Jeff's lawyers suggested Dahmer plead insanity, and Jeffrey disagreed.
It wasn't crazy, it was just like a compulsion.
Right. On January 13th, 1992, Dahmer pleaded guilty but insane to 15 counts of murder, and the defense brought in expert witnesses to try to prove Dahmer was insane. Joyce's suicide attempt timeline. Joyce Flint had attempted suicide when her son was a little boy. She attempted suicide again following his 1992 verdict in episode 8. The real suicide attempt took place in March of 1994, 2 years after the verdict. Episode 9, The Boogeyman. Lawsuits against Lionel and Jeffrey Dahmer. Details leading up to the trial are chronicled in Lionel's book, A Father's Story.
What do you mean I have to pay him the profits? How can we do that? There are no profits.
The book hasn't sold the 50,000 copies that would have turned a profit, so there's nothing to hand over.
It was Lionel's idea, not a lawsuit, to donate the proceeds to the victims' families.
Which one of them is this?
It's all of the families.
It wasn't all the families, but 3 that filed a lawsuit against Lionel. 2 of the families sued for using their names in the book without consent. And the Stephen Hicks family filed a wrongful death suit against Lionel, his wife Sherry, and ex-wife Joyce for parental negligence. Also, not all the families sued for Dahmer's estate while he was in prison. Only 11 out of 17 of the families were awarded Jeffrey Dahmer's estate. Prison pranks towards inmates were not confirmed. The pranks performed in the Boogeyman episode have Jeff doing a Dahmer.
That's what they call doing a Dahmer.
But the prison pranks towards the fellow inmates were never confirmed. Pastor Roy Radcliffe confirmed that the guards told him Dahmer would occasionally joke, "I bite," and had a Cannibals Anonymous meeting poster in his cell. The bloody ketchup and shaping prison food that resemble body parts are from Christopher Scarver's testimony, and his story has been inconsistent over the years. Episode 10, God of Forgiveness, God of Vengeance. Scarver never had interaction with Dahmer prior to killing him. Part of Dahmer's benefit of entering general population was having a prison guard with him at all times because he was a prime target due to his celebrity. Scarver's testimony kept changing. When asked for his motives for killing Jeffrey Dahmer, Scarver first said God told him to do it. Then, on trial, he hated the fact that Dahmer seemed remorseless for his crimes. On another account, he said he was tapped on the shoulder from behind in a taunting manner, and both Dahmer and Jesse Anderson laughed at him when he looked back to see who it was. He tried to release a tell-all memoir about the event in 2012, but it never hit the shelves. Many believe his acts were racially motivated because he was currently serving a murder sentence where he yelled out Mr. Hitler before shooting his Caucasian victim. Anderson tried to blame his crimes on 2 black men, and a majority of Dahmer's victims were black, so it's natural for some folks to draw a conclusion that the crimes could have been racially motivated. Dahmer, Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, is based on actual events. But these were some of the creative liberties that were taken in the show. If there's something I missed, let me know what really happened in the comment section below. Also, if you want to see more of these type of videos, leave some suggestions on what you would like to see next.